the moment my family shoved a single dollar across the table while handing my sister nearly $7 million. They thought they had finally proven I was the biggest disappointment in the family. My mother smiled like she had been waiting years for that moment. She looked straight at me and calmly reminded everyone that some children never live up to expectations. My father quietly told me to earn my own future, and my sister proudly admired the fortune sitting in front of her. They believed they had won. They had no idea another envelope was still waiting inside the attorney folder, and within minutes, everything they believed about me would collapse in front of their own eyes. My name is Emma Brooks, and for years my family treated me like the forgotten daughter. While my younger sister Natalie chased promotions, vacations, and expensive lifestyles, I quietly built a simple life as a high school business teacher. I never cared much about appearances or recognition. My grandfather, Walter Brooks, always told me that character revealed itself through consistency, not attention. I believed those words, even when nobody else seemed to notice the sacrifices I made. Everything changed after my grandfather suffered a serious fall while working at Brooks Hardware, the family store he had spent 5 decades building. The accident revealed a neurological illness that slowly stole his strength. The doctors explained he could still enjoy life, but he would need constant help. Someone had to care for him and keep the business alive. My parents immediately explained they were too busy. Natalie promised to visit whenever she found time, but those visits became excuses instead of commitments. Without hesitation, I resigned from my teaching position, packed my belongings, and moved into the small cottage behind my grandfather's home. Every morning began before sunrise. At 6 o'clock I unlocked the hardware store, brewed fresh coffee, greeted local farmers, stocked shelves, balanced inventory, and handled customers before returning home to help my grandfather with breakfast, medication, and therapy. My afternoons bounced between the store and the farmhouse, while my evenings were spent cooking dinner, organizing paperwork, and making sure he rested comfortably. It became an exhausting routine, but I never complained because I loved the man who had always believed in me. The store was never just another business. It represented generations of hard work and trust. Families depended on it during emergencies. Farmers relied on it before sunrise, and every customer knew my grandfather by name. To me, protecting the store meant protecting everything our family had ever built. Unfortunately, the rest of my relatives saw something completely different. They looked past the memories and saw only valuable land that could eventually become millions of dollars after a new highway reached our town. Whenever my parents visited, they rarely asked how my grandfather was feeling. Instead, they casually brought up property values, future development, and possible buyers. My father often stood outside studying the acreage while discussing market prices. My mother carefully suggested that selling everything would remove unnecessary burdens from the family. My grandfather always smiled politely before changing the subject, and sometimes he secretly winked at me, as if he already understood exactly where those conversations were heading. Natalie visited more often than our parents, but her reasons were never difficult to recognize. Every visit included another financial emergency. Sometimes it was a broken car. Other times it was unpaid rent or unexpected bills. My grandfather generously wrote checks because he loved her, yet she still criticized the store every time she left. She called it an outdated burden and insisted I had wasted my education by giving up teaching for a dusty hardware shop. I never argued. I simply returned to work while wondering how people could look at the same place and see completely different worlds. The deepest wound came during Thanksgiving dinner. I had prepared every meal, cared for my grandfather throughout the day, and barely sat down before my mother turned the conversation toward me. She pitied the career I had abandoned and announced to everyone at the table that some children simply failed to reach their potential. The room became painfully quiet, but nobody defended me. I realized that evening my value would never be measured by kindness or loyalty. In my family, success meant money, impressive careers, and appearances. Several months later, my grandfather called me into the kitchen after everyone else had gone home. His illness had progressed, but his mind remained sharp. He admitted he feared the family would sell the store immediately after his death because none of them truly understood what it represented. Then he asked whether I would continue protecting the business if he found a way to make sure nobody could take it away. I accepted without hesitation, knowing it would become both an honor and a lifelong responsibility. We also understood my family well enough to expect legal challenges. If my grandfather simply left me the store through his will, they would almost certainly argue he had been manipulated during his illness. To prevent that possibility, we hired an experienced estate attorney and involved his physician in every step. I remained outside the office during every meeting because I wanted absolutely no opportunity for anyone to accuse me of influencing his decisions. Instead of placing the store inside his future will, my grandfather legally sold Brooks Hardware and the surrounding property to me while he was still medically certified as fully competent. The agreement required me to purchase everything through a long-term payment plan using future business income. It was not a gift. It became a financial responsibility I willingly accepted. Medical evaluations, witnesses' notarized documents, and professional records surrounded every signature, creating an almost impossible legal barrier against future disputes. Nobody outside those meetings knew what had happened. For nearly 2 years, I kept opening the store before sunrise while silently carrying the ownership papers hidden away. During those same years, my mother continued reminding relatives that I had failed in life. Natalie continued collecting financial help from my grandfather, and my father continued avoiding difficult conversations. Every insult became easier to endure because I understood protecting my grandfather mattered far more than defending my pride. Caring for him during those final years became the greatest privilege of my life. I learned every medication schedule, listened to stories I had heard countless times, helped him through difficult nights, and made sure he never felt embarrassed as illness slowly stole his independence. While others posted vacation photographs and celebrated promotions online, I watched over the man who had quietly built everything our family enjoyed. Shortly before he passed away, my grandfather handed me an old metal candy box. He instructed me to keep it closed until the attorney gathered everyone for the reading of his will. Inside, he promised, would be everything necessary if anyone questioned the truth. 11 days later, he peacefully passed away while I held his hand, carrying the same store keys I had used earlier that morning before opening the business as always. Curiosity finally convinced me to open the box 2 days before the reading. Inside rested 3 simple items. The first was the complete purchase agreement transferring ownership of the store to me years earlier. The second was the physician's written certification confirming my grandfather fully understood every legal decision he made. The final item was a handwritten note that simply read that the store belongs to the person who unlocks the front door every morning. Reading those words filled me with peace instead of excitement. For the first time in my life, someone had truly seen everything I had quietly carried. The funeral confirmed everything I already knew about my family. They accepted sympathy as though they had devoted years to caring for my grandfather, while neighbors privately thanked me for keeping both him and the store alive. Even then, my mother warned me not to expect much from the estate because people who made poor life choices rarely received meaningful rewards. I smiled without correcting her because I already knew the truth waiting inside the attorney's office. The day of the reading finally arrived. My parents sat confidently beside Natalie, already imagining how they would divide millions of dollars. The attorney calmly read the financial will exactly as written. Nearly $7 million went to my parents and sister. Then he reached my name and carefully slid one crisp dollar across the table. My mother laughed openly. Natalie smiled with complete satisfaction. My father quietly repeated that I should earn my own future. I simply folded the dollar, placed it inside my pocket, thanked the attorney, and waited. Moments later, the attorney opened a second envelope containing my grandfather's final letter. He explained that the hardware store had never been part of the inheritance because he had legally sold it to me years earlier while fully competent. Every document had been witnessed, notarized, medically certified, and completed long before his illness advanced. The symbolic dollar had never represented rejection. It simply prevented anyone from claiming he had forgotten me while reminding everyone that I had already earned the only legacy that truly mattered. Silence replaced every smile in the room. My mother immediately accused me of manipulation, until the attorney calmly placed every legal document before her. My sister suddenly realized the business and property would eventually become more valuable than the cash she had celebrated only minutes earlier. My father lowered his head without saying another word. I finally looked at my mother and quietly explained that my grandfather had not been manipulated. He had simply been paying attention to the person who showed up every single day. I never asked for their money because my grandfather genuinely wanted them to have it. I only accepted the responsibility I had already spent years earning. I invited them to visit the store anytime as family, but not as future owners. Then I walked outside carrying the folded dollar inside my pocket and the weight of a 50-year promise resting on my shoulders. Today, Brooks Hardware still opens every morning before sunrise. I continue making payments on the purchase agreement, and I am far from wealthy. My mother never apologized, although I eventually stopped needing one. My father occasionally visits and quietly helps around the store, which is the closest thing to an apology he knows how to offer. Natalie finally admitted she regretted missing the final years with our grandfather, and for the first time in many years we speak honestly. Every morning I unlock the front door before dawn, switch on the lights, pour fresh coffee, and glance at my grandfather's handwritten note resting beside the register. It reminds me that real legacies are never handed to the loudest person in the room. They belong to the one who keeps showing up long after everyone else has gone home.